class is basically about how you end up to be potentially sitting where we're sitting right now. And what we're going to do is we're just going to talk to you about how we arrived to where we are, and then go down a list of things that we think are important for you to know and to consider while pursuing what you want to pursue in music and practicing and all of those things. And then we'll have a series of questions, if you all have questions. Usually there are a lot of questions in this class. Because, unlike most professions, the profession of music is one that is shrouded in mystery. I can't tell you how many times a young person or somebody just starting out asks me for advice, like career advice, and there is really no formula for what we do. And the only thing you can do is practice and do good work and be smart about things, and that's what this class is all about. So I think we're going to go around and share our stories briefly. I started playing the cello when I was 7 or 8 years old, after begging my mom, who's a single parent, to play the violin. And she took me to a local music school finally. And the violin teacher was out of the office that day, and they recommended that you stay and watch a lesson with your potential teacher. And the lady at the front desk said that I should watch a cello lesson because the cello teacher was there. I had no idea what a cello was, and when I walked out of the lesson, she asked again, "So don't you want to play the cello?" And I said yes, because I was afraid if she said no, we'd never get back there because it took so many years to get there in the first place. So here we are, like 30 years later, playing the cello. And that's my story. That's the story. But I was lucky with that teacher that she had just finished 2 degrees at Juilliard and moved to Miami, where I grew up, because she was married to an architect at that point. And so she wasn't really working or trying to get a job per se, but she did start teaching right out of school. She had the best information. She had been studying with some of the most legendary teachers. So I fell into the hands, the first hands I ever fell into were skilled, and I was lucky about that. It doesn't happen all the time that way. I ended up studying with this teacher from the time I picked up a cello until I left for college. And in all of those times, there was a few years where we couldn't afford lessons, and I got lessons for free from her. And it was hard, but it all worked out. I ended up going to an arts high school in Miami called the New World School of the Arts. And in that school, there was, at the time, one of the great American string quartets, the Miami Quartet. And I then had lessons with the cellist of that quartet all through high school and my private teacher that I had started with. And I went to the Cleveland Institute of Music after that and studied for 4 years. And I was never really an orchestra person, and that school at the time was heavy, and still is to some degree, very heavy orchestra. And so I was a chamber music person because of my high school experiences with the Miami Quartet that sort of changed the trajectory of what I wanted to do. And so I played on a lot of chamber music groups in college. I think I was the only person who did what they called sonata class, regular chamber music, and intensive quartet seminar at the same time. And so I was one of those people. And I went to summer camps, I went to the Sarasota Music Festival and a bunch of other music festivals, Canizal Hall, a bunch of other chamber music festivals, not orchestra festivals. It was hard for me to sort of make my own niche in college as a chamber musician because that really wasn't the focus of that place at that time. But I did it anyway because that's something that interested me. I was the kind of person, and still am, I think to some degree, that never wanted to just live anywhere for a job. I need to really like the city that I'm living in. So I wanted to live in New York City. And in order to work, because being a chamber musician, it's not like being in an orchestra or being a professor or being a soloist. You have to work. There's no audition really for what I do, like there are for orchestras when there's an opening, or for universities when there's a professorship opening. So in order to work, the best scene was New York City, and I had always loved New York, so I decided the best way to do that was to go to grad school in New York. So I ended up going to the Juilliard School in New York, and ended up dropping out of grad school because I was working, and that's really what I wanted to do anyway. And my teacher at the time, who was the legendary David Sawyer in the Guarneri Quartet, he had a similar life, and he had a whole freelance life before the Guarneri Quartet started. And he was very keen on what I was doing. And he asked me, he's like, "Are you working? Are you supporting yourself?" I said, "Yes." He's like, "Well, then get out of school, and I'll see you every Saturday for lessons." And I saw him almost every week until he died. It was about 10 years of a relationship there. And I was only supposed to be in school for 2. Again, free. I was lucky to have these relationships with these great people. I started working a lot in New York. I started doing studio scene, which means playing for commercials and movies. I worked with a lot of pop artists on recording projects and big concerts at Madison Square Garden and things like that. I started working a lot in the Broadway scene for Broadway shows and at Radio City Music Hall with the Rockettes and doing all of that. Also playing chamber music during the summers and playing the occasional piano trio recital or solo cello recital in New York or with concertos with orchestra. It was a varied career for me at that time, doing a lot of things. And I remember at one point I went back to Mr. Sawyer on one of our lessons, which usually lasted about 3 hours, because we'd have lunch and we'd talk and then we'd play and we'd tell stories. It was like a whole afternoon of things. I told him I was feeling sort of artistically unfulfilled by what I was doing, because I was working a lot, but I didn't feel like I was playing at the level that I was, say, in college. It was just very practical cello playing at that time. And he said to me that, the only thing that's constant in all of the work that you're doing or throughout your life is you. And your own integrity is the only thing that matters artistically, and that's how you can sleep at night. It doesn't matter what you're doing, it's how you're doing it, because you're the one doing it. And so that sort of changed things for me in regards to the way I felt about what I was doing. And at that time, I had a death in my family, and I realized I was only going home for like 1 day a year back to Miami. And so I decided that I needed to find some way to be with my family more. So what happened was, in Miami, they built a new performing arts center called the Arts Center. It was called Carnival Center, and then now it's called the Adrian Arts Center for the Performing Arts, which is much like Lincoln Center in New York City. It's actually the second largest performing arts complex in America. And so what happened was they moved the opera, Florida Grand Opera, to the Arts Center, and they wanted to revamp. And so they hired a new orchestra. And they needed a principal cellist. So I ended up getting that job because I wanted to sort of legitimize what I was doing, and it also gave me an excuse to see my family. I ended up doing that for 5 years, and I would fly back and forth sometimes every other day from New York to Miami, because I was still working in New York. I'm big on working. There are words for me. The hustle. And I was sort of, at that same time, after like 4 years, I was feeling like I wanted to be back in New York. I was in a relationship at that time, and the traveling was very hard on that. And so I felt like I needed to get back to New York and maybe lead the orchestra, at which point the Catalyst Quartet began. And so that segued immediately into the Catalyst Quartet. So my final season with the opera company was the first year of the Catalyst Quartet, which, as luck would have it, and whoever is up there is planning my life, was what I really wanted to do from the first place. And I remember my very first chamber music, my very first quartet rehearsal of my life, and at that moment I said, this is really what I want to do. And with what I do, it's like one of the biggest mysteries, because how do you find 3 people that you want to marry, basically? And playing in a string quartet is one of the hardest things. I don't think anyone who doesn't play in a string quartet could even begin to understand what it is to play in a string quartet on every level. It's very challenging. And having a career in it is even more elusive than just being a musician, and what that all means in this day and age. But I ended up getting to do the thing that I always wanted to do, and not many people can say that. But at the same time, I really believe in where we are in arts and in sort of music, in the music world today, meaning that I don't just play in the Karlos Quartet. I still do all of the things that I did before. Like for instance, the quartet has been away from home for over a month now. We were in Colorado before the first spa, which was in Chicago for the last 2 weeks, and before we came here. So I've been away from home for over a month now. But before that, we were on a sort of vacation, at which point I was playing in 6 different Broadway shows simultaneously. And playing 8 or 9 shows a week, different shows. And so I still do that, and I'm the Dean of Artistic Affairs here, and I listen to all your auditions and decide if this class happens or if this class doesn't happen, and design your curriculum, and work together with my amazing faculty and do that. I was a judge at the Sphinx competition this past year, and so I've been doing some adjudicating. I've been contributing to panel discussions such as this on a variety of topics, and I do everything. I do it all. And it all revolves around music. So my whole life is music. From when I wake up in the morning to when I go to bed, I'm doing music, but it doesn't mean I'm playing the cello. It means that I have a life in music that is multifaceted and runs the gamut from A to Z. And so that's me. So now we're going to go to one of my 2 colleagues.